Tēnā koutou, ko Courtney Johnston, tōku ingoa, ko ao te Tumu Whakarae mō te papa. It is, it's such a pleasure to be back with NDF, and I've got to say, after years myself of being engaged with the board and being part of the conference organising, after 20 years to see the effort that's gone into moving the conference online, my heart goes out to you as organisers, but also my gratitude. What you've done for the community here is amazing. And I also want to thank everyone who's tuning in. It is, it's not the easiest time. It's certainly not the easiest time down here in Wellington. The gift and the value of your time and your attention and your support over these 2 days is magnificent. It is everything I would expect of this community. This morning, I wanted to talk about trust. There were so many different things that I could talk about coming to this conference, and I really wanted to create a pathway in some ways for Anna Feyfield, who's going to be following on after me. I've been watching Anna and the way that she works since she came to Wellington, and I wanted to find a way of connecting what we do and what the media does in a way that we might all find interesting. So for that reason, I chose trust, specifically the trust that the public has in our institutions and how they expect that trust to be used. Way back in 2014, I gave a talk at this conference, and it was called Museums and Social Work, a Year of Changing Thinking. And in it, I cited this piece of research by the British Museums Association that they'd done the previous year in 2013. And it's a piece of research that I go back to and think about all the time. They made a real effort to capture what regular people think. Workshops out in the community all around England with visitors and non-visitors. And they called it Public Perceptions of and Attitudes to the Purposes of Museums in Society. And the report found, and I'm going to try to use my voice to do italics here, strong, positive emotional attachment to museums by both visitors and non-visitors. And they also found that attitudes had warmed over the last generation as museums had shed their image of stuffiness and sterility and become more entertaining and interactive. And one of their most notable findings was the trust that participants accorded to museums, with museums being seen as more trustworthy than both government and the media. And as part of these workshops, the participants were asked to discuss and rank a possible range of things that museums should focus on. And these ideas had come from the sector itself. The museums had proposed these ideas for the workshop participants to discuss. And I'm really sorry, I do know there are non-museum people in the audience, but aroha mai, I'm sticking to my lane, and I'm talking about the research that I know best. We all know that all of our institutions hold this trust, but I'm just going to talk about research that I know. So for the workshop participants, the most essential role played by museums was as the caretakers of national and local heritage. And this was really strongly linked to national pride, and it was seen as the biggest contribution that museums make to society. Museums were also seen as having a really important role in public education and providing information that people could use in their real lives rather than some kind of elite research that exists up in the ether that real people don't get to interact with. People at this time, and this is 2013, they did think that museums had a role in promoting well-being and happiness, but they didn't see that in the framework of mental health and well-being. Instead, it was more about leisure activities, about restoration and refueling yourself, and also about entertainment and linked to that public education goal. Then there were the things that participants rated as unimportant or low priority. And these were the ones back in 2013, 2014 that that actually hit me a little bit in my heart. Two of the things that they ranked as low priority were fostering a sense of community and helping the vulnerable. These objectives were not seen to sit well with the core purposes of museums, and in fact they were seen to undermine and quote the essential values of trust and integrity that people cherish with regards to museums. And then there were two things that participants flat out saw as contradictory to what museums were here to do. If anything, they would undermine the trust that museums hold. And these two things were providing a forum for debate and promoting social justice and human rights. And the report observed, and I'm going to quote here for a minute, participants consistently agreed that museums were not appropriate environments in which to hold controversial debates. Rather, museums regarded as places to go to find out factual and unbiased information and for people to subsequently make up their own minds about a particular topic. This is not to say that people felt museums can't broach controversial subjects, but they should remain neutral in the displaying of information rather than act as a leader in telling people what to think. And so, as the report noted, although the museum profession in 2013 might have been questioning at all this notion of neutrality in museums, the public, as represented by this sample, weren't. So where are we today? There's been a whole bunch of research out in the past year, and so I've skimmed across the top of that. Research out of Britain and Australia both showed that trust remains really high in our profession and institutions. The Council of Australasian Museum Directors participated in research last year that produced the report Political Trust and Democracy in the Time of Coronavirus. Annoyingly, they focused on museums and didn't throw in a question about libraries as well. But in an environment of increased trust in federal government and public servants, both of which had nearly doubled to 54%, Australian respondents had the highest level of confidence in defence and law and order organisations like the Army, which came in at 78%, and the police, who came in at 75%. And levels of trust were also very high in health services at 77%. And then cultural institutions like museums came in at 70%, with universities at 61%. Meanwhile, in Britain, Ipsos's Maury Veracity Index, and I've possibly got some of those acronyms horribly wrong, it's the longest running poll of trustworthiness in certain jobs and professions. And in the survey, respondents are asked whether they would trust the information provided by people who work in one of 30 different kind of jobs. And of course, I saw this news on a museum website, and so they really front-footed the finding that museum curators had moved up 4 places in the rankings. 2020, they'd been at 8th place, and now they were 4th equal with teachers at 80% trustworthiness ranking. And then if you read a few more paragraphs down on that particular news report, you find out that the 3 top professions are nurses at 94%, our friends the librarians at 93%, and doctors at 91%. And this is a survey that does provide some demographic breakdowns. They found that the gender and the political affiliation of the respondent had very little effect on the rating. But what did begin to impact the ratings was educational attainment. So 93% of respondents who had a degree qualification said they would trust a museum curator, whereas 76% of people who hadn't attained a degree qualification agreed with that statement. And these are the kind of statistics. I mean, one of the reasons that we participate in and commission this research is to put in speeches and to put in advocacy documents and to argue for our worth and our importance. But I'm not always that sure how great they are for the conversations about how we want to be as a sector and a profession. And I think the next survey that I'm going to talk about gets a little bit closer to that. So last year, the American Alliance of Museums also conducted research into museums and trust, finding again, and they conduct this regularly, finding again that the public continues to hold museums as highly trustworthy organisations, ranking only second to friends and family for where you get trustworthy information from, significantly more trustworthy than researchers and scientists, news organisations, the government, business, and social media. And for people who had visited, it was non-visitors and visitors, people who had visited a museum in the past 2 years, which was about 25% of respondents, museums were their number one trusted source of information. And this high level of trust goes right across the spectrum of museums, which in America they count from art museums to zoos. And the top three things that contribute to this sense of trustworthiness are that museums are fact-based, that they present real or authentic or original objects, and that they're research-oriented. And the AAM research does provide even more demographic breakdowns. People who are from households that are majority white are significantly more trusting of museums than people from households comprised of people of colour. Again, political affiliation of liberal, conservative or moderate had little impact on the ratings, but generally people who expressed more inclusive attitudes were significantly more trusting of museums than people who expressed anti-inclusive attitudes or who were ambivalent about inclusion. So I just want to circle us back to that 2013 British research. The AAM Museum and Trust Survey that I've just been talking about, it set out on purpose to probe respondents' attitudes towards neutrality and the position that museums are trying to take on important issues. And 35% of the respondents to this survey indicated that one reason contributing to their trust in museums is that museums are non-partisan or neutral, and 27% believe it is never appropriate for museums to suggest or recommend behaviours or actions to the public. Museum goers are more than likely to think that museums have a point of view, but just as likely as non-visitors to think that museums should always be neutral. And people who think museums are neutral express higher levels of trust in organisations overall and museums specifically, and are 2 times more likely to consider museums to be credible sources of information than people who believe that museums have a specific agenda. So social justice, environmental concerns, cultural restitution, battling misinformation, disinformation, these are all causes that our sectors have adopted, and they're important to us as professionals and practitioners and believers in this community. And meanwhile, or alongside that, as professionals, we're also so acutely aware of the deficits and the damages inherent in the history of our institutions and our professional practices. And we're committed to accepting this and learning from this and trying to make things better. However, all of this research suggests that our audiences are not always aware of or in agreement with these commitments. And this is all a way of leading into Anna Feyfield, editor of the Dominion Post, as our first keynote speaker for NDF22. It's a well-worn aphorism, and I couldn't find out who it actually is attributed to, that news is the first draft of history. Media documentation and news reporting is really integral to the way that we do our work. Both the way that we work with media organisations to reach our audiences, to spread our news and our messages, but also as sources for the material that we will take into our collections, that we will care for, that we'll make accessible, and that we will later interpret back out to people again. In recent years, the Dominion Post and its parent company Stuff have very publicly interrogated the shortfalls, bias and damage of their own legacy of public coverage. And in late 2020, the paper published their Our Truth, Tamata Pono investigation into racism in reporting and marginalisation of Māori, and apologised for their history and their actions. A new company charter was introduced with Te Tiriti at the core. The report, the apology and commitments were received in diverse ways, from accusations of wokeness and declarations of cancelled subscriptions, right the way through positivity, celebration, and then to cynicism and some weariness. I'm a Wellingtonian, I'm a reader, I'm fascinated by the work that the Dom Post and other media agencies are doing, and the way that they're doing this work in public, in front of us, with us, as readers and consumers. And that's why it's such a pleasure for me to be introducing Anna today. Anna took on the editorship of the Dominion Post, which is Wellington's daily newspaper, and the Wellington News Desk for Stuff in October 2020. She came from a role in China as the Beijing bureau chief for the Washington Post. She's been reporting overseas since she was 25, but she's come back home to Aotearoa, New Zealand. Speaking personally, Anna's done massive things for arts reporting and arts coverage here in Wellington and nationally, and as a sector we're really grateful to be feeling that not just the attention but also the dedicated reporters who are building up their skills and their networks in this area and able to delve into the issues of our sector with real integrity. Since her return to Wellington, Anna's editorship has grappled with the COVID pandemic, with rising aggression towards journalists currently exemplified at the anti-mandate protests in Parliament, and she's been personally advocating for more transparency from the public sector. I'm so delighted that she has accepted this invitation from NDF22. I know you're really going to enjoy Anna. I can see her out of the corner of my eye. Please do whatever you're doing at home or at work to welcome Anna to the hot seat.